a number of our politicians, though, have been what I call elite captured. If you have to go back to almost Pierre Elliott Trudeau, who was a strong supporter of communism in Russia and loved China. And then you look at Power Corporation, the Desmarais family, and how they started working in China and still today, I understand, have a number of projects. And through the Desmarais and Power Corp, you've just about all of the prime ministers end up, when they're retired, having worked with the Desmarais family in some capacity. And also, during their tenure, have at least somewhat of a sympathy towards China. And sadly, the only way I can describe it, China, not everybody within the Chinese government, but a lot of the Chinese Communist Party is probably the best well-run, in my view, transnational organized crime group we have today. If you start looking at how they impact society, the Uyghurs, etc., they're trying to take Tibet, saying it's always been part of China. It never has, and there's a book coming out to explain that in detail. They have very little sympathy for human life. We know that they've been involved in harvesting of some of these groups. Fentanyl trafficking, as I've argued and stated on many times, we're dealing with the Chinese Communist Party. I firmly believe if they wanted to stop the fentanyl precursors from coming into North America, they could.
Just to build on what you're talking about there's a lot of people that, yeah, for me, when I've covered this topic before, it does very much seem to be two different things at play, and sometimes they overlap for each person as well. But as you're pointing at, a lot of our politicians, they look at it as, okay, well, if I increase these ties and expand economic opportunity with China, and then, when I retire those companies that I essentially open up an entire market for billions of people, you can get a cushy little paycheck from them, once you're retired, and that becomes their retirement package. And so they don't want to rock the boat when it comes to stopping these more nefarious actions or really cracking down on that relationship, because then they would be essentially harming their own retirement package. But then also, to your point, there's definitely an ideological bend as well, where there's a lot of people within the group of, what's commonly called the Laurentian elite between Ottawa, Toronto, and Montreal that definitely have ideological sympathies with the socialists and the communists, as you were mentioning, Pierre Trudeau, and he was infatuated with the Chinese Communist Revolution, and obviously Cuba and Russia and so on. But two, I think one thing that you talked about in your book as well is even how some of these people might find themselves in a position where they get compromised. So, for instance, the little red books or the jockey packages,
the lycée packs, yes.
Yeah. So how does that work? How do they find themselves in a situation like that where there can be in a compromised environment?
Well, China is a master at compromising people, and I had a very good friend that I got to know in China. He was a Canadian citizen, older gentleman. His grandfather was one of the original tycoons in Hong Kong. Very well respected, and I would say even respected by some very high-level triads, just because of his status in society. But I had many conversations with him, and as YL, it's Lo Yuklung, he's since passed away. He was a 60, 65 when I was in Hong Kong. But I can remember YL saying to me is, whatever you do, don't take anything if it's offered, because you will pay. They expect to pay back. And that's falls into their Guangxi philosophy. So the differences in Canada are what we're used to in sort of a North American culture. Is I come up to you, Ryan, and say, look, I really like you to pass information to me, I'll give you $100,000 for doing it once you start passing me information. Because it's quid pro quo right off the bat. China, I'll come up, I'll give you $100,000. And you ask, well, what's that for? Well, just stay in touch. We will talk. I'm not asking for anything, but I'm going to give you, or I'll give you a job and we'll talk. There is an expectation you will pay back. And if you pass away, there's an expectation your children or your wife will pay back. And that is how it works in the Chinese philosophy. And it may not be this year, maybe 10 years down the road. We're not used to that. And the other thing that I think for Canadians, especially what I saw in my 90s over in Hong Kong, we weren't used to seeing the kind of money they were talking, like massive amount of money. I can remember sitting in the American Lounge in Hong Kong with YL Low, and he was with the president of the Bank of Indonesia. And over a handshake, they consummated $1 billion deal.
Wow.
No lawyers, the two of them talking, and they didn't mind me sitting there. There was nothing nefarious about it. It was to do a massive amount of housing complexes. And I just thought it's definitely a different society, definitely easy to corrupt people. So in China, they're masters at it. And they're masters at it because they will try and get you in compromising situations. They use a lot of honeypots, good-looking girls. It's Epstein on steroids is a way to describe it. And I hate to say it, a lot of individuals go for it. And once they go for it, they're compromised. And I'm not saying that there isn't, that everybody's been compromised. That would not occur, but I can guarantee there is some that have been compromised. And
Well, yeah, and that's even something that's been backed up by Toronto Police and CSIS as
correct.
well, right? I think Sam Cooper wrote the article about one of the underground casinos that was being run by these triad groups and how it was essentially a compromat or operation, and how they would invite politicians there for a night of gambling and come just have some fun and have some drinks, and then once they're in there, the whole place is wired and bugged and videos, and then you've got evidence of somebody in a high position doing something they shouldn't, and that person is essentially yours from here on out. And so it seems to me like that's a major issue. And then how does that come into play then when you see certain things, say for instance, like the e-pirate investigation and the Cullen Commission that were in the 2010s era? Can you walk us through those two? Well, the one was a commission and the other an investigation, but can you walk us through what they aimed to find and then also why they fell apart?
Well, e-pirate, I think, was, really highlighted just how massive money laundering and drug trafficking was occurring. We knew it by the number of fentanyl overdose deaths, but it really highlighted how China was playing such an integral role, China and Mexico, to put it in reality, and obviously collusion between the different groups. But it all showed the massive amounts of money that was occurring, and you had to ask it, like, how blind were we? I mean, this was being done right in front of us. Politicians were being invited to these locations left, right, and center. And, they were lapping this stuff up rather than asking questions. Common sense should have prevailed. It should have been asking a lot of questions. Vancouver has been totally co-opted. British Columbia has been totally co-opted, not Vancouver. British Columbia has been totally, in my view, has been totally co-opted. And it's happened over slowly, but surely over year after year after year. And there is so much intertwined organized crime money in Vancouver right now. I think if you pulled it out, it would go bankrupt. And that's sad. That's absolutely sad. And
Yeah,
so,
because even our own federal government, estimates they put the number somewhere between 43 and 113 billion dollars annually. Now that's a national number, but if you take low estimates, if you take their $43 billion number, that means it's a money laundering is a top 20 industry in Canada. And if you take the top estimate of 113 billion, it's a top 10 industry. It's on par with things like grocery stores and so on. So, you know, it's wild to me to see that there hasn't really been any major crackdowns, which from my understanding, e-pirate was the closest we ever got to something like that, which with a criminal investigation into money laundering. But yeah, why did that fall apart?
Well, it all had to do with the requirements under Stinchcombe and disclosure, and sadly, there was, from what I'm aware of, there was some disclosure that should never have occurred. It involved an informant, and they didn't elaborate, and it's a good thing they didn't. And because of that, they had to, and it went to defense counsel, and because of it, they had to stay the charges to protect the individual. Um, a mistake like that is colossal, and how does it happen? And again, it goes back to what I was saying is we haven't built a justice system to take this much criminal activity on, and yet this is reality today. And so, you look at it between enforcement and prosecution, we're falling far short in this country.